today we are talking about retention and labor market outcomes for registered apprentices or tradespersons in general in New Brunswick. This study goes from 2009 to 2017, and so if you were certified or received certification in a trade within these years, you are included in our sample. Just as a general note, retention has been a bit of a hot topic in New Brunswick and the Atlantic provinces as well. But a lot of that discussion has been geared toward immigrant retention and retention of university and college students. And so what that means is a little less is known about the retention and general labor market outcomes for registered apprentices or tradespersons in New Brunswick. And so what this presentation does is sort of shed light on this equally important demographic whose active presence in the province is just as needed as someone who goes to a university or graduates from university or community college. So to start off, there are a couple ways in which a person becomes a tradesperson in Canada. You can either go the certified route or the non-certified route. If you are a certified tradesperson, you either became certified through the registered apprentice route or the trade qualifier / challenger route. If you are a registered apprentice, that just means you completed a training program within the province or somewhere else and became a certified tradesperson. If you go the trade qualifier or challenger route, that means you had enough work experience within that trade or had enough hours within the trade and then became certified. So the main difference is one group attends a training program, whereas the other one relies on their work experience and the number of hours they've accrued within the trade. Should you choose to be non-certified, you would have to legally, you'd only have to work within non-compulsory trades. As the name or as the title implies, if it's non-compulsory, then you don't need to be certified before you can practice within the trade. So in New Brunswick, there are about 71 designated trades. Only 12 of those are compulsory. That means you need to be certified before you can start to practice. The other 59 are non-compulsory, and so you'll find that the people that go the non-certified route are very likely practicing within one of those 58 trades. So trades can also be broken down into your red seal trades and your non-red seal trades. Red seal trades are essentially trade groups underneath the red seal program. And what that program does is standard for training and assessment in its trades or in its trades group with the ultimate goal of sort of encouraging people or encouraging mobility for those that certify in a red seal trade. And once you complete that program and once you certify in that program, the candidate then completes a standardized exam, which will allow them to get a red seal attached to their provincial or their territorial certificate. This then makes them red seal endorsed. And so of the 71 designated trades in New Brunswick, about 50 are red seal trades. And so construction electricians are a red seal trade, bakers are a red seal trade, welders, plumbers. And I also wanted to note that just because you are a compulsory trade does not mean you're a red seal trade. So the two are mutually exclusive. And then under non-red seal trades, you have locksmiths, switchboard operators, and automotive service technicians, which are also a compulsory trade, which essentially means, again, that you need to be certified before you practice. I linked the complete list of red seal trades and compulsory trades and all the 71 designated trades underneath. So a couple of highlights of findings. Overall, there's about an 89% retention rate in the graduation year for tradespersons in New Brunswick. So that means about 89% of the graduating class is still in New Brunswick after graduation. 2 years after that falls to about 86%. We see that apprentices have a higher retention rate than trade qualifiers, both in the graduation year and 2 years after. And also, and I'm going to provide a little bit of context to this later on. But are red seal endorsed, you have a higher retention rate than if you don't have a red seal endorsement. These results can be compared to our work using or working with university and community college graduates. If you declared New Brunswick as your province of residence prior to being admitted, you had a 91% retention rate in your graduation year and about 84% 2 years after. And so you see that even though in some years it's lower and some years it's higher, it's around the same range of retention for people that get their post-secondary education in New Brunswick. Some more highlights. Overall, your starting income, which is your income 1 year after being certified, is about $69,000. Apprentices tend to earn less than trade qualifiers. If you are in a Red Seal trade, you earn less than if you're not in a Red Seal trade. And if you are Red Seal endorsed, you earn less than if you are not Red Seal endorsed. Again, I am going to provide a little more context to this as the presentation goes on. But this can be compared to community college graduates from New Brunswick community colleges, who earn about $32,000 as their starting income on average, $39,600 if you got your undergraduate degree in a New Brunswick university, and then about $61,000 if you graduated with a postgraduate degree from a New Brunswick university. So we answer the question of retention and labor market outcomes using a Statistics Canada dataset called the Education and Labor Market Longitudinal Linkage Platform. It is a bit of a mouthful, but for short, it's called the ELMLP. And this platform contains 3 separate administrative datasets that when you link them to the final tax dataset, you're able to look at retention and income over time. So one of them is the post-secondary information system, which looks at university and community college graduates in Canada, specifically public universities. It has information on their enrollment, their certification, their graduation, and specifically their field of study, which is pretty important for their outcomes. The Registered Apprentice Information System, short form is RACE, that contains the similar information, so enrollment, registration, graduation, field of study, for apprentices, for registered apprentices, and just general tradespersons that certify in Canada. When you link either or both of these data sets to tax data, you're able to see retention and income over time. Tax data, or T1FF, is essentially your tax return. So it covers all those who complete a T1 tax return. And you're able, so when you link these data sets to tax data, you're able to see these outcomes over time. Now, going on to how we calculate retention, we first identify the portion of all tax filers in a specified graduation year that have New Brunswick as their province of residence, and then divide that by the total number of certificate holders that file taxes at all. So, for example, if we're looking for the 2-year retention rate for, say, people that graduated in 2009, we first collect the number of people within that graduating class that declare New Brunswick as their province of residence in 2011, which is 2 years after. And then we divide that by the total number of people in that graduating class that file taxes in 2011, regardless of where they have filed their taxes. And as with really any tax return, that residence is based on December 31st of the tax year. And so when we go by this type of calculation, a retained student is someone who still declares New Brunswick as their province of residence on their tax return within the graduation year, which is what we look at, graduation year retention, or 2 years after, which is your 2-year retention rate. There are a couple limitations to using tax data to calculate retention. First of which is if you don't file taxes in a given year, you are left out of retention calculations because you're not in the T1FF dataset for that year. So to give an example, if I'm looking at the 2-year retention rate for those that graduated in 2009, if you don't file taxes in 2011, you're not included in the retention calculations for that 2-year retention rate for those that graduated in 2009. But luckily, only about 4 to 8% of tradespersons in our sample don't file their taxes in a given year. So even though, so the number is pretty representative of the people that are still within the province, because it's just about 4 to 8 that don't file in a given year. Another limitation would be if a person decides to, say, declare Alberta as their province of residence, but they're actually in New Brunswick, we don't include them in our retention calculation because they're considered to not be in New Brunswick. Even though they are physically in New Brunswick, their tax return states that they're not. So we kind of rely on the honesty of people with our with tax data and research. And then the last limitation is sort of a general limitation for all data sets. We are limited to the most recent year the tax data is available to researchers. At the time, this was 2017. Right now, I do believe there's an extra year that's been added. But any data set that you're working with, you are limited to the most recent year that data is available. And for this particular study at the time, it was 2017. We do use two kinds of income for the labor market outcomes, first being taxable income. Taxable income is essentially your total income minus your deductions as reported on your tax return. And this is the Canada Revenue Agency's definition of it. This type of income includes your self-employment income. And so for the tables that we prepare using microdata, we use taxable income, mostly because a lot of tradespersons are self-employed. And so to exclude that category would be to exclude an important part of, or important portion of our sample. For employment income, that's essentially your income as reported by your employers on your T4 slips. This includes all your paid employment, so your wages, your salaries, your commissions, all before deductions. This, however, excludes your self-employment income. And so we use employment income only in the tables that were prepared using publicly available data. And because we're limited to what those public tables provide, we work with employment income. But we, of course, state when employment income is being used so that you can be aware of the fact that those that are self-employed, their income is not factored into this average or this median. Just as a note, all income is in 2017 constant dollars. So a couple final notes before I head into the results. We are subject to minimum sample size restrictions, which essentially just means that for some years, for some categories in some years, we couldn't publish the numbers. And this applied to residual disclosure. And just to give you an example of what residual disclosure is, using the 2009 class once again, if I decide to release the total number of registrations in 2009, and then I also release the number of male registrations, the residual would be the number of female registrations or other registrations. If that number of female/other doesn't meet the minimum sample size requirement, say it's 5 for this data set, I can't release the total registrations by gender. I'll only be able to release the total number of registrations. And so in cases like these, we supplement our tables with publicly available tables that use the same data set that we do. Unfortunately, these tables are limited because they don't use the same parameters that we do. So for example, they use employment income while we use taxable income. Also, they don't calculate retention, they just have general counts. And so we just supplement those tables for their general counts and their employment income. So that's all for just some preliminary notes about the data. Going on to the results. In any given year, there are about 1,000 certificates that are being granted in New Brunswick, trade certificates that are being granted in New Brunswick. This number, as you can see, has remained fairly stable over time. There have been slight increases in some years, but in general, it has remained stable. The majority of these recipients are male. At the start of the study period, there's about a 30/40 to 1 ratio of males to females. And later on, you see that it's about a 20 to 1 ratio of males to females. Now, if you compare this to any other category in like university or community college, it's not a very good ratio, but the fact that it has reduced over time is encouraging because it just means that there are more women that are being certified in the trades. There are also more people getting certified in red seal trades than non-red seal trades. This ratio is about a 10 to 1 at the start of the study period, and then afterwards it reduces to under a 10 to 1. So, and this is mostly because there are more people getting certified in non-red seal trades. Last thing for certifications, there are more apprentices than there are trade qualifiers. So there are more people going through the apprentice route to certification than people going through the trade qualifier route to certification. This ratio is about a 2 to 1. So compared to the other categories, it's not as bad, so to speak. So for apprentice registrations, there are about 5,000, just over 5,000 people that are registered in an apprenticeship program in New Brunswick in any given year. There's slightly over 1,000 that are new registrations, and then about 4,000 are already registered or being reinstated into the program for that year. And when you compare this to the certificates being granted to apprentices, there's about a 9-to-1 ratio, which essentially means that for every one person or every one apprentice that receives a certification in a trade, there are 9 that are still registered in a program. And when we compare 2009 to 2019, there are 15% more apprentice registrations and about 8% more certificates being granted in 2019. So that is some encouraging news for apprentices or just tradespersons in general. So as I mentioned during the highlights, trade qualifiers earn more than apprentices. And so, for example, if you look at the 2009 cohort, by the way, each line represents a graduating class or a graduating cohort. So 2009, that's the gray dotted line over there. If you look at the 2009 cohort, for starting income, they earn between $60,000 and $70,000, whereas trade qualifiers earn between $70,000 and $80,000 as their starting income. Also, you see that trade qualifiers have a wider range of starting income. So apprentices have a range of about $60,000 to $72,000 1 year after they get certified, whereas trade qualifiers have between $62,000 and $84,000 as their starting income range. Also, as a sort of a general note, income patterns are generally the same for both groups. And so where you see increases for apprentices, there are also increases for trade qualifiers. The magnitude, however, is different for the two groups. And so in some cases, trade qualifiers have a higher income growth or a higher increase, whereas trade qualifiers have a lower increase. Now, just to give a little bit of context to why trade qualifiers earn more, as I mentioned earlier, trade qualifiers, the main difference between the two, trade qualifiers and apprentices, is their pre-certification requirements. Trade qualifiers are required to have a certain number of hours, which are usually higher than the requirement for apprentices. And so when we see the higher earnings for trade qualifiers, it's very likely due to the fact that one group has more on-the-job hours prior to certification than the other one. Also, we see that trade qualifiers tend to be older, which means they likely have more developed networks and more work experience, or just more experience with the trade than apprentices who are mostly under 29 compared to the 50 years and over percentage for trade qualifiers. Now going on to retention. Sorry about that. Yes. Going on to retention, trade qualifiers tend to have a lower and relatively less stable retention compared to apprentices. And so when we look at the 2-year retention rate in particular, for completers or apprentices, it was about 93% on average. And for trade qualifiers, it was about 76%. But like with income, this gap can also be explained by the difference between the two groups. Trade qualifiers need work experience in order for them to get certified. And this work experience can very well be anywhere in Canada. Whereas apprentices, when they complete a program, it's likely that program is completed in New Brunswick. And so the type of person that decides to go through the trade qualifier route, it is understandable that they have a lower retention rate. Qualifiers could also be tradespersons from other provinces that don't have a red seal designation. And so they come to New Brunswick to get that red seal designation and then they leave. Or they could be a newcomer who doesn't want to go through the full apprenticeship requirement. And so they just go through the trade qualifier route and then they move to a different province afterwards. Or they could just be a tradesperson who wants to expand their customer base and therefore they get certified in New Brunswick as well as other provinces, because then they're able to practice across the provinces, and that creates a little more income for them. This all just kind of goes to say that trade qualifiers are just less likely to stay in the province than apprentice completers who are clearly much younger and are likely just starting out in their careers. So this table is a little heavy, so I have highlighted the occupations or the trades groups that I'm going to be talking about. So this is presenting the median employment income of New Brunswick tradespersons by their trade groups. As you can see, the crane operators over here and the power line technicians, these are the highest earning trades groups. They earn as much as $100,000 or above $100,000 as early as 2 years after being certified. Unfortunately, though, data is not available in all years for these groups. And so when we limit it to those groups that have data available for most years, we see that it's industrial instrumentation and control technicians that earn the most. But if data was available in all years for crane operators and power line technicians, it's very likely that they would be the highest earners. Of these high earning groups, crane operators are the only ones who need to be certified before practicing in New Brunswick. So power line technicians are earning as much as $100,000 and they don't even need to be certified before they can practice. So that's pretty lucky. So lowest earning trades are your cook trade group and your carpenter trade group. I only highlight cook because in most years they are the lowest earning trade group. They earn between $30,000 and $45,000 2 years and 5 years after being certified. So I took the liberty of highlighting just one particular cohort so you can see income levels and income growth. Now there isn't anything special per se about this particular cohort, but it just gives you a better visual of income over time and just income levels across trade groups. As you can see, power line technicians over here are the highest earners, earning above that $100,000 mark 2 years after being certified, and even more 5 years after being certified. Unfortunately, crane operators are not available in this year, and so they're not included in this graph. But speaking in terms of income growth, with tradespersons or with trade groups, there isn't one particular trade group that consistently earns the highest or has the highest income growth in each year. So for example, in 2009, it was construction electricians that had the highest income growth. In 2010, it was iron workers. 2011, it was a different group. And so that there is a bit of inconsistency that way with tradespersons and with trade groups. Another thing to note about income is for the cook and the carpenter trade groups, they do experience some income growth between 2 and 5 years after being certified. And the reason I highlight this is that's not the case for all groups. Not all groups see growth in their income between 2 and 5 years after being certified. So if you look at the welder group up here for the 2012 cohort, they earn much less 5 years after being certified than 2 years after being certified. Same thing goes for construction or industrial, that's construction electricians. They earn less 5 years after compared to 2 years after. And one last thing to note about the trade groups, the amount of money that each cohort is earning over time, or later cohorts are earning, has declined with time. So take for instance, the 2011 cohort of industrial electricians earn about $100,000 2 years post-certification. And they're over here, by the way. I don't know if you can see the cursor, but they earn about $100,000 2 years after being certified. And then the 2012 cohort earns around $87,000. And then you go over to the 2016 cohort, and they earn roughly $79,000 2 years after being certified. And this is basically to say that if I graduated in 2012, I can't confidently say that I'm going to be earning this amount of money based off of the cohort that came before me. So there is a little bit of an inconsistency in incomes over time. There isn't a guarantee that you're going to be earning a certain amount once you graduate or 2 years after you graduate with trades groups, unlike with university or college graduates where it's a little more even across years of graduates. Now, speaking in terms of retention, as I mentioned earlier, we were subject to minimum sample size restrictions when working with microdata. And so we collapsed the trade groups into 2 categories for retention calculations. The biggest difference between these 2 categories is Category 1 has more high-earning trade groups than in Category 2. Both have high-earning trade groups, it's just that Category 1 has more. And so what we see is that the group with more high earning trades have a lower retention in most years than those that have fewer high earning trades. And also at the point where you see income start to decline, especially the 2-year retention rate, where you see income start to decline for the group that has fewer high earning groups, you see retention start to increase for the other group. So onto income and for red seals versus non-red seal trades. I just want to reiterate that the red seal program sets certain standards interprovincially for assessment and training for its trades across the province, with the ultimate goal of helping those that certify in these trades with mobility. But despite this, we do see that non-red seal trade certificate holders earn considerably more on average than those that have red seal certificates. We also see a bit of an income gap between the two groups for a lot of cohorts that widens after as more time passes since being certified. And so that just means that there's a little less chance of a catch up for those that certify in the red seal trades. I am going to provide a little bit more context to this after I speak on their retention rates. Okay, so it should be noted that red seal trade certificate holders are generally younger than non-red seal trade certificate holders. So the same pattern we see with trade qualifiers versus apprentices, the people in the red seal trades are between that 25 to 29 year age group, whereas with people that certify in non-red seal trades, they're about 50 years and over. So, and we also see that there are more trade qualifiers within the non-red seal trades than those within the red seal trades. And so as we see with a higher income for trade qualifiers versus apprentices, it's not surprising that people within the non-red seal trades have a higher income, because not only are they older, most of them are trade qualifiers. Now, to the last category in this presentation is the red seal endorsed versus the non-red seal endorsed. And just to explain what it means to be endorsed, if you certify in a red seal trade, you then take a standardized exam and get your certificate of qualification. This then gives you a red seal on your certificate. You can only those that are in red seal trades can be red seal endorsed. Whereas if you don't have a red seal endorsement, you could have certified in a red seal trade and just didn't take the exam, or you could have certified in a non-red seal trade and not be eligible for that exam. And so moving on to their retention, we see that getting a red seal endorsement means your retention is higher than those that are not red seal endorsed. We also see a lot more fluctuation, relative fluctuation in the retention of non-red seal endorsed, whereas for those that are red seal endorsed, their retention is pretty stable over time. And for income, we see also that earnings are higher among those without a red seal endorsement. Just as we saw with the red seal trades, the age distribution for those that have a red seal endorsement is skewed toward the younger age groups. And most of the people with a red seal endorsement are younger. And so it's the same trend we see with the red seal trades and with the trade qualifiers. Most of the people without a red seal endorsement are trade qualifiers, and therefore their age is skewed toward those that are 50 years and older, whereas people with the red seal endorsement are under 29 years old. The bulk of them are between 25 and 29 years old. So just a couple final notes. What we found so far in this presentation is the combination of age and work experience, as well as the trade that you certify in, sort of affect your income as well as your retention. And that's pretty much the case for anyone in the labor market. Being older or having more work experience has an impact on your labor market outcome. Now, of course, that's not to say that these factors are causal for tradespersons. This research paper doesn't control for these factors, especially age. And so when we look at these earnings and mobility differences, we can't say that you earn less or you earn more or you're more mobile just because you belong to a red seal category or because you belong to an apprenticeship category. So when you control for these factors, that brings us closer to a causal relationship. And so when we talk about future work for this project, analysis should include a regression model whereby we control for these factors that we already suspect are sort of determinants for your outcome as a tradesperson in terms of income and retention.